Okay, today we're going to have a go at a Sargent & Greenleaf 6730. This lock is very commonly found on a lot of different things, from gun safes to vaults, in homes, small businesses, etc., etc. As we can see, it is a UL Group 2 lock. So this type of lock is a spring fence lock, and that's because we have a lever here with a spring. It is spring loaded where the nose is touching the wheel pack, and there's a fence behind here that rides on top of the wheel pack, and we are doing our manipulation simply by testing these contact points. So we have a left and right contact point, and what we're doing is we're feeling that wheel to when it just touches. And what we want to do is try to measure that contact area for group 2 manipulation anyways, just when it touches. When it rises up, we've gone too far, and that can be done on either side. So we want to just be able to figure out when it touches. For the 6700 series locks, we have the driver, spline key, the spindle, which goes out directly to the dial. So the dial is mechanically locked to this driver. It spins around. It has a driver pin on it that will connect with the wheel packs and spin the wheel packs. And it also has this neat little tension. I like this versus some other models that only use tension washers, because you can adjust the tension on it. And then of course it has the classic relocker for the bolt. So in starting with our lock here, I'm going to start by turning and getting all my wheels left. And so I'm going to do at least 4 rotations to the left. Okay, and then I'm going to stop around 50, and then I'm going to find my contact area. Okay, yep. Alright, so I'm finding my contact area. Okay, so about 5.5 there. Just a little over 13 there. So I'm going to call it 6 and 13 for my contact area on this lock. And I'm going to proceed around until I get to 0. Once I get to 0, I'm going to go ahead and go back to my contact area, and I'm going to do a contact reading. So I'm going to say that's about 5 3/8. And yes, we want to try to be as exact as possible. So I'm going to look at my graph paper, which we'll see later on what the whole graph looks like, and I'm going to measure up 5 3/8. And that's on my left contact area. So my right contact's going to be about 13 and a half. Now I'm going to go back, and I'm going to do increments of 2.5. So I'm going to go 2.5. The slop, if you will, or the tolerances on this is 1.25 either way. So I'm going to go ahead and just do 2.5 increments. That way I don't have to go around 100, because that would take a lot longer. And on these locks you can usually find a gate signature without having to do that. Come back here, take my left contact reading. Okay, and let's say about 5 1/4. And my right contact reading. Oh, 13.5. The combination has been set by my expert combination changer, who happens to be my significant other. So that is very handy. I do not know the combination of this lock, but we shall find out. Okay, and to kind of show you what's going on from behind the wheel, see what number am I on? Just about 55. All right. So I go to the place on the wheel. In this case, I'm testing out 57.5, and then I'm going to go back to my contact area, and I'm going to look for the contact points. And if I'm doing this correctly, I should be finding the area that's just barely hitting the contact area, or that left contact point. Now I'm going to test the right contact point, and I should be just barely bumping into it. And on my graph, I'm marking where that lies. And now I'm going to go to my next number. In this case, it's going to be 60. That's where I'm at. Back to my contact area. Alright, so we have the first graph done, and it's a little bit hard to see. Maybe for future videos I'll use a Sharpie or something. But essentially what we're doing is mapping the mechanical tolerances of the wheel back. Everything we're doing in lockpicking is, for the mechanical tolerances, right? And with the mechanical safe lock, nothing different. So what I'm looking for is a jump, or not necessarily a jump, a smaller gap than what is normally recorded. And that gives me an indication that the nose is dropping into the driver. And I see something like that right around, right after 10. I end up dropping all of a sudden down from 13.5 to 13, or 13 and an eighth. And down below here, after 10, I can see us moving from 5 and a quarter up to 5 and that'd be 5/8. And then we see it kind of rise and then go back down. We only see one little peak and then come back down. Looking across the rest of the graph, I don't see, because that doesn't really come up sharply or down over here. So this looks like the area that we want to focus in on. So next what I'm going to do is go ahead and amplify that area. So right now that center is at 10, 11, 12.5. So I'm going to start at, say, 9 and go to, let's say, 18. And so I'm going to do those numbers now, and we're going to do it one by one, and that way we can amplify everything. So let's just make sure I haven't jacked up the lock, and we're going to reset it with all the wheels turned to the left. Okay, and then I'm going to stop on 9. Now this area is within our contact area already, so I'm going to come back, measure my left contact, which is turning up to be about 5 1/4. And because we can't cross 9 to get to our right contact, I actually have to spin the wheel all the way back around to get to that right contact point. And I'm getting about 13.5 there. We've already done 10, so we don't need to do 10 again. So we can go ahead and pass up 10, and we'll go to 11. Get our left contact point. we'll call that 5 3/8. Okay, do our right contact point, which I have to go all the way around for. Okay, still going to call that 13.5. Zoom out. Doop. So our graph is going to be these blue dots down here. We can see that it amplified pretty well here at 10, 11, 12, and 13. Up here was 10, 11, 12, or 10, 11, 12, 13. So I am going to say that because of where we're at, I would say 13.5 is going to be the number that we found. It's okay finding half numbers because again the tolerance is 1.25 on this lock. So I can go ahead and write down 13.5 and be able to figure out 11, 12. Actually 12.5. It would be 12.5. Sorry, I can't count. Alright, so 12.5 is where we're going to put our gate center. Okay, so next will be to figure out which wheel this belongs to. Alright, so to figure out which wheel it was on, I went ahead and did the high-low test. Basically, we're throwing off one wheel at a time by 10 higher, and then throwing off that same wheel again by 10 lower. So in this case we found 12.5 being our gate center, so our high test is going to be done with 22.5, our low test with 2.5, and we go through this sequence to figure out which wheel it is. And basically what we're doing is we're looking for the widest gap, or where the widest gate signature to tell us what wheel. And when we look through the numbers, we have 5 and 4/8. Let's see if we can focus on that maybe a little bit. There we go. And 2/8. And I kept everything in eighths just to make the math easier. And we can clearly see that our widest gate here is going to be either 1 or 2. So that's not too terribly conclusive. So that's one of the reasons why we run both the high and the low test, because the low test goes ahead and confirms that sure enough it is wheel 3. So what I've marked down is that wheel 3 is at 12.5 left. That's what we found. Now, like I said before, even though we have it at 12.5, nobody's going to pick 12.5 as their combination. So it's most likely going to be 12 or 13. In that range. And when I go to find the final combination, what I usually do is go through the numbers and kind of go to the edge of where that gate might be to try to figure out which number my spouse actually put in. Alright, so now it's time to set up for graph 2 and get going with that. Okay, so now we're going to get ready for our second graph. And this time we're going to place all of our wheels to the right. So I'm going to go past our 0 at least 4 times to reset all of the wheels to the right. However, we do know that our third wheel is 12.5. So we're going to park that third wheel on 12.5. And we're going to do that by going past 12.5 once, and then stopping on it the second time. And then we're going to take our contact reading. Okay, so about 5 7/8. And take our left contact reading, or right contact reading. About 13 1/8. And in this case, since we're going right, we're going to start working backwards. So we'll go ahead and park it on 97.5. And then we're going to go ahead and set our third wheel again back to 12.5. Take our contact readings. Okay, so I have about 5 1/4. Come back around. And I have 13 1/8. And we will continue going until we have our second graph completed. Alright, so to show what this looks like from the back side, what we're going to do is park it on my next number, which happens to be 72.5. So I'm going to go 72.5, and then like I said, we have to park that third wheel on 12.5 because that's where we know that we found a number. So I'm going to go past 12.5 once. So I'm going to pick up that third wheel, and then I should park it on 12.5. So from the back view, what should happen, because it is that third wheel, is you should see the gate right underneath the fence, which is nice and handy. Now I'll go to, or this ends up being a good example, because sometimes on this lock, wheel 2 happens to be the first one found. Let's see here, and I have 5 and 5, just a little over 5.5. Come around, do my right contact point, which is tricky because it's right on the edge because of that 12.5. We have about 13 1/4. And then I'll proceed to my next number, which is 70. And continue from there. Alright, I had to change up locations. The spawn came home. So in this graph, there was a very clear indication at 21. So I went ahead and amplified that area and found 21 to be the center of the gate. Okay, we did the high-low test on graph number 2. Since we found the third wheel, all we had to do was the test on the first and second wheel. And we found clearly that it's wheel 1. So we are concluding that wheel 1 is at 21. And we found that with a right rotation. So now to find the last number, all we're going to do is brute force it, and we're going to do that by going from increments of 2.5. So we'll place the first wheel at 21. The second wheel will just brute force on our way down the wheel pack till we find an open, and we'll place the third wheel on 12.5. And then after that, I'll go ahead and kind of mess with the edges of the open that I find, and see if I can figure out which number exactly it is, because that 12.5 does bug me. So we'll be back with an open. Okay, and we have an open. It happened relatively quickly, which was nice. All I do for my opens is I'll start ticking down the graphs, brute forcing it, and just hitting the numbers, and I end up getting an open at 87.5. And I played with the numbers a little bit with 87.5 and also my 12.5, and I ultimately came up with, oh, come on, camera. Ultimately came up with a combination of 21, 87, 13, which we'll go ahead and put in now. So we can see that the lock, the bolt is, and I'm going to have to hold that in when we go, but we can see that the bolt is not retracted yet. So go past 21 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me not look through the camera and do this. So 21, I said 87. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and 13. 1, 2. All right. And now if we head towards 0 and I press on the relocker, we can see that the bolt is retracted and we have ourselves an open. of the Sergeant Greenleaf 6730 UL Group 2 lock.